So why is it so incredibly hard to find a family home right now? If you've been tearing your hair out asking that very question, trust me, you are not alone. In this explainer, we're going to dig into the real data behind what's being called the Great Housing Mismatch.
Yeah, does it ever feel like searching for a family home is just an impossible mission? Especially if you're a millennial with kids, right? It's like you're playing a high-stakes game of musical chairs, but there are way, way too few chairs. Well, there's a really fascinating story in the numbers that explains exactly why this is happening.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll unpack what this great housing mismatch actually is. Then we'll look at both sides of the story, why boomers are staying put and what's locking millennials out. After that, we'll zoom out to see the slow generational change that's happening under the surface. And finally, we'll peek into the crystal ball and ask, what does the future hold?
Okay, let's get right to the heart of it. We're talking about a seriously lopsided market, especially for those bigger, family-sized homes. And look, this isn't just a hunch or a feeling people have. The numbers, well, they tell a pretty stark story. Wow, okay, this chart gets straight to the point. Take a look at this. Empty nest boomers, we're talking folks whose kids have grown up and moved out, they own a whopping 28% of all the large homes in America. 3+ bedrooms. Now, compare that to millennials with kids, the very people who need those bedrooms, they own just 16%. That gap you see, that's the mismatch in a nutshell. And this donut chart really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? That 28% for empty nest boomers, it's the biggest single slice of the pie. No question. But then, look over here at the Gen Z parents. Their slice is so tiny you can barely even see it, less than 1%. It's just a crystal clear visual of how much of the family housing supply is being held by older generations. So here's the central paradox, right? Millennials are now the single largest generation of parents in the country, but they own this disproportionately tiny slice of the homes built for families. It's a huge disconnect. So what's actually causing this? Let's dig into the first big piece of the puzzle. So, first up, the boomers. To really get what's going on, we have to understand why so many are staying put in their large homes. And it's not as simple as just they like their house. No, there's some really powerful incentives keeping them right where they are.
Okay, this number right here, this is a huge deal. Almost 58% of boomer homeowners have completely paid off their mortgage. Let that sink in. No mortgage payment. Can you even imagine that kind of financial freedom? It creates this massive, almost unbeatable incentive to just not move.
And it's really a perfect storm of reasons. Of course, there's the money, that paid-off mortgage. But there's also the fact that they're rooted in their communities. They're close to friends, family, their whole life is there. But here's the real kicker, the paradox of it all. Even if a boomer wanted to downsize, buying a smaller home today could actually cost them more than just staying in their big, paid-off house. It's wild.
All right, so let's flip the coin. We've talked about why boomers are staying put. Now let's look at the other side of this mismatch, the millennials who are, for all intents and purposes, locked out. They want to buy, but they're hitting wall after wall.
And this quote really says it all, doesn't it? More than 1 in 4 millennials do not plan to buy a home in the near future because of high mortgage rates. We're not talking about a small inconvenience here. For a huge chunk of the generation, today's rates are a complete deal breaker. It's just off the table for now.
So what are the roadblocks? Well, it's really a triple threat. First, you've got those killer mortgage rates we just talked about. Second, just saving up for a down payment feels like an uphill battle with everything else costing more. And third, let's say you beat the odds and get the money. Good luck finding a house to buy. There's just not enough inventory. It's the perfect storm keeping people out of the market.
So when you're faced with all those barriers, what do? Well, people adapt. For some, renting is a conscious choice. They like the flexibility, they don't want to deal with fixing a leaky roof. But here's what's really interesting. A growing number are taking a totally different path. They're looking at the housing market and saying, you know what? I'm going to invest in the stock market instead.
And this isn't just a handful of people either. Look at this. In just 10 years, the percentage of 25 to 39-year-olds who invest has more than tripled. That is a massive behavioral shift. It's like, for a whole new generation, the stock portfolio is becoming what the starter home used to be, the main way you build wealth.
Okay, so with all that, it might feel like this gridlock is gonna last forever. But it's not static. The housing market is always moving, even if it's happening really, really slowly. Underneath all this pressure, a generational shift is definitely happening.
And this timeline really shows that slow motion change. Go back a decade, to 2014. Millennials with kids own less than 5% of these large homes. Fast forward to today, and that number's up around 16%. Now yeah, it's a slow climb, absolutely. But the trend is undeniable. The torch is being passed, one house at a time.
So you might be asking, where are these houses coming from? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle is something called the Great Wealth Transfer. Just look at the silent generation, the generation before the boomers. 10 years ago, they owned 18% of large homes. Today, that's down to just 8%. It's been more than cut in half. As those homes come onto the market, that's what opens up new doors for younger buyers.
Okay, so we've seen the mismatch, the reasons behind it, and the slow-moving changes happening under the surface. But what about right now? What does the near future hold? Well, if there's one word to describe it, it's uncertainty.
Yeah, experts are being pretty cautious right now. Mortgage rates have shot up to a 7-month high, and that could really cool things down. Now, there is a glimmer of hope that if rates settle down, we could see a wave of catch-up home buying. But honestly, that is a huge if. Nobody is placing any bets just yet.
And that's really the key takeaway, isn't it? You have these two things happening at once. The long-term, slow and steady trend shows ownership shifting to younger generations. But in the short term, like right now, these economic headwinds, especially interest rates, are making the journey for any single home buyer incredibly choppy and unpredictable.
So all of this leaves us with a really big fundamental question. With so many people struggling to get in the door and a whole new generation exploring totally different ways to build wealth, are we actually watching the American dream of owning a family home change for good? It's a heavy question, and honestly, only time will tell.